All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started. And thank you all again for being here. How many of you have one of these?
If you don't, I'd like to put your hand up.
Yeah, exactly. How many of you have ever used the internet for anything? All of these things that we take for granted, that we use on a daily basis for everything that we do to communicate with our families, to do our jobs, it's all based on a global telecommunications infrastructure that's taken literally over a century to build. I come from a telecom background myself. When I got out of the Air Force, I took a job with a contractor called Raytheon, but I did that for 5 years, and then after that I transitioned to the telecommunications industry. So I went from being in the intelligence community in the military, where I was functioning primarily in megahertz, to the megabits industries of the telecommunications sector. It was mostly international, but a lot of that international telecom experience is also applicable to what we use on our daily basis here in the United States. I know that there are great jobs in that sector. I know that there are great opportunities for careers in that sector. And we've got two great panelists that will help us dive into some of the details of the types of jobs that we can find in the telecommunications sector. And then I'm going to ask each one of them to introduce themselves. So, Thomas.
My name is Thomas Eybl. I'm a senior corporate counsel at T-Mobile, working primarily in the regulated space, things like 911, wireless emergency alerts, like Amber Alerts you may be familiar with, calls to rural landlines, areas that the FCC is active in. I'm a retired Marine. I served in the Marine Corps as an enlisted Marine, then I became an officer, was a logistician, and then eventually the Marine Corps paid for me to go to law school, and I became a judge advocate, which is how I get to be a lawyer at T-Mobile now. So excited to be here. Thank you guys for having me.
Freddie.
Hello, my name is Englebert Jimenez, also known as Freddie, and I'm originally from New York, and somehow made my way to Virginia through the military initially. And my experience is pretty vast. My employment here is with AT&T as a principal enterprise architect. So I am passionate about technology, always have been. My career into telecom started from the military, as a 31 Lima, also called a cable dog, and then transitioned over to 25 Bravo, which is IT specialist. So the military kind of really carved my path towards this IT field. Both my parents are from the Dominican Republic, and I was first generation born into this country, and have a few kids that are trying to groom towards the IT world, just because that's what I know, and that's what I love. I also have an older son who was actually went to MEPS yesterday, so we're hoping to get him involved and a little bit more discipline. That's I think is always great and needed for any IT role. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into how I got into the space. So again, I was an Intel guy. I was a SIGINT person. I spent most of my life on the C-130 and I was stationed in Panama. I spent almost 3,000 hours on the C-130 in Intel missions, and then afterwards as a contractor, I was running around the jungles of South America chasing drug traffickers. How do you translate that into a telecommunications career? Well, that's what I had to figure out, right? So what I learned was that in my case, I had to find a way to be able to take advantage of the skills as opposed to the job titles. So when I approached Sprint International at the time about taking the job, they actually offered me two jobs, either sales or program management, right? I didn't know much about the sector, so I decided it was probably better for me to go into program management so I could learn some of the details around how to make things happen before trying to sell those things that I had to make happen, right? So that was my way in, so I was able to leverage my skills and intelligence and being an information supervisor and those types of things, that detailed type of approach to execution, to work in a field that I didn't know much about technology, but I knew a lot about how to get things done. So that was my pathway into going into program management. And eventually I went into sales marketing and ran sales and marketing for the Western Hemisphere for France Telecom. But that was a path, right? The challenge for a lot of folks, I know, is how do you get in, right? So let's talk first about the types of jobs that there are in the sector, and then afterwards, let's talk about how folks can go from the military and find ways to be able to get into some of these jobs and some of these companies. So let's take a minute and talk about the types of occupations and jobs that are in the sector.
Absolutely. So when you think about telecommunications companies, what we're really talking about is large technology, large engineering companies that provide kind of global in scale, but also very hyper-local, right, like down to the smallest towns in America, connectivity, and that build networks and systems that connect people. And I frequently, when I talk to people about it, describe it as magic, right? The fact that you could, anybody in this room, you can pick up your phone, you can call somebody anywhere in the world. You can make an instantaneous connection. Like you will hear a ringing tone indicating to you that the phone you're attempting to reach is ringing within seconds. Like that, like think about that. That's really magic, right? There are people alive right now in our span of life who could not envision that happening. And so all the things that make that possible, right? From the people like you described that lay wire, right? Nowadays frequently talking about fiber wire, right? Which in itself, while shreds of fiber wrapped in plastic, sometimes copper, no longer lead, right? Like there's already a high level of sophistication in doing that, in understanding how to connect them. Aerial fiber across towers, and then plugging all that into the network elements, right? Which are really sophisticated computers, right? Frequently that then connect back to what we call the core network, and then these various functions, right? Where we now do full motion phone calling over video, and over 5G, we're constantly exploring new use cases. So any type of technology, from computer programming, from network, like engineering, building these actual devices, all that is possible, and I think constitutes the core of what a telecommunications company does. And then around that is kind of everything else. Like you heard in the last panel about finance, all these companies have very sophisticated finance departments, right? Because you have enterprise clients that you're engaging in long-term, highly complex business deals with. You have government sales departments because, right, we're obviously in DC. We don't need to sugarcoat that. Everybody sells to the government, right? We have local retail stores. There's a T-Mobile store somewhere around you where you can go and get a cell phone and receive services, right? And all these things that make that happen. Human resources, right? That we frequently speak to people coming out of the military that have a human resources background that are trying to find an in. Large companies always have human resource departments. There are going to be people there who provide security at the facility. All of these things are possible, but like you said, it's frequently about finding an entry point and then adopting your skill set and selling yourself, selling your skills, right? That is always what we're trying to do, is trying to persuade somebody on the side that the skills you have are valuable, right? And the telecommunications companies, because of the things that we do, frequently do have a high number of veterans in them, right? Because the military produces a lot of people that have the communications background that then bring that over, and it is a natural transition. Like I said, I'm a retired Marine. But when you work with people that build telecommunications network, you encounter like a stunning number of former special forces communicators, right? Because they're not afraid to like climb on towers and touch high tension wires because they're crazy, right? But like that's the point, is that these opportunities exist. And so really, we provide a good avenue for veterans because they will be able to reach out to other veterans in the company that can then be their internal advocate and make the transition a little bit smoother.
I think I would take a different approach in the sense of looking at a list of what is out there. I would look at it from a use case perspective. So everything is related to technology. If you are someone that is in the military and is looking at getting into the civilian world, look at what you use, and there's a job related to that. So if you're really into gaming, for example, what aspect of gaming do you like? Are you into being the player? Or are you into building a computer? If you're not into building a computer, do you like the supporting stuff? Do you care enough about the networks that support it, and kind of work your way backwards? Because it's all related to a field that you're seeing. So it just depends on which aspect you like. So I'd say to you in that example, if you're a person that is into gaming and just use it as an example, and you're into the use aspect, well, maybe you find yourself in an occupation in the military that's flying drones, and a lot of it is based off of movement, those type of skills and assets, but there's a career field towards that. On the latter end of that, if you're looking at how those all work together, and you know that your idea of playing games, you can get a faster response time because you have a faster network. Or maybe you're interested in the network switches on it. Then there's a lot of manufacturers. You'll notice manufacturers like Hewlett-Packard, Cisco, Juniper, etc. You can then look at the different certifications that are related to that and understand those manufacturers. So the list that I would look at in the telecom field is network engineering, it is user interface, it would be programming, and I think it takes a different type of skill set to find out what is your passion, what do you like, and then follow that suit, because there is a certificate or education or experience that you can gain on either pathway that you choose. So I would stick to those in telecom is communication, like I said, as far as network engineering, all the way to programming and everything in between.
I appreciate that, because the first thing we talked about today in our afternoon discussion was about transitioning, right? Transitioning from the active duty military to civilian careers. But in addition to transition, there's also the word translation, right? So we've got to be able to figure out better ways to be able to translate some of those skills into aspects that the civilian counterparts would be able to utilize and value and apply to those occupations that they have, right? An infantry person, you know, they've got lots of skills, but how do we translate those skills into jobs that are available in the private sector workforce? One of the yellow hats that I wore, I was the chairman of the workforce board for the Commonwealth of Virginia, the state line level. There was no, at the time, there was no focused, dedicated effort to help support those transitioning military folks, despite the fact that 10% of the population of Virginia is veterans. So we created that, but a big part of that was also figuring out how do we translate what those skills are and those capabilities and those experiences into things that the civilian employers would be able to see and value. So any thoughts on that?
So I'll start by echoing what Freddie said. Education is going to be key, and I think that if you are able to identify ahead of time an area you'd like to focus on, then there's always, right, in the service and as you're transitioning out of service, a tremendous amount of resources to help you with that. Because like even adding a random string of letters after your name that identifies some kind of certificate will make you more visible, make you more approachable, and will frequently provide like a network entry to new areas of meeting people. And I think what the other thing it'll do is it'll introduce you to terminology. And frequently the less so in engineering, I feel like sometimes, but what you're simply struggling with is translation of terminology. Because the thing you used in service is called something else for anodyne government reasons. And because you've used it here in the government, you've never been exposed to it on the outside. You've never had to make that translation before. But sometimes doing that certification, getting that education ahead of time, can provide you the opportunity to make that translation a little bit easier. And I think the other piece of that is when you are kind of mapping out, and to an extent that sometimes depends on, like if your son, for example, does one tour and he does 4 years, right, then you're a little bit closer to it because this is a small part of what you've done that is a launch pad for what you're going to do the rest of your life. If you're like me and you do it for over 20 years, or like you, and then you retire, you've done this for an extensive part of your life, and your resume is full of this stuff. And therefore you have much more you need to translate, or much more you need to pick through to identify what is the important part. What is the part? You're going to take all of it with you, but what is the part that I want to tell you about right here, right now, as the entry point to the follow-on conversation? And I think that a lot of times, thinking about what that strong suit is, like you just mentioned, the passions, right, can provide that obvious top line as to here is the value that I bring. We frequently think about, like, the uniform is not the value. The uniform is like an identifier. But it's all the things inside of it that you need to bring out. And sometimes we don't think enough about, like, what that all is and how we can speak to it. Because you want to be put in a position of speaking about it with passion.
I totally agree. I think when it comes to telecom, and you're looking at translation, I think it's key. It brings me back on when I was studying fiber optics and looking at 25 route. Actually, that one was cable dog. I didn't think of it at the time. At the time, we're connecting one tank to another. You have these big, 96 count fiber. You're just connecting, and your focus is just communication. You want to know that one vehicle can communicate with another. Well, you don't realize that what you're learning is the same way that one building talks to another. When you're doing satellite links, you don't realize that what you just learned in the military is the same way that an enterprise is talking with satellite links to go from one location to another. It's just a different way to get there. So I think you also have to do your due diligence as a military member to understand the use case and find ways to relate it. You know, every time we pick up a phone or we're making a phone call, it's using some type of technology, wireless, to make that communication, and sometimes it's an integrated approach. That wireless may be talking to another landline that is then connected to a fiber that then, and then there's a backbone behind it, and really find your thing. And it's not cut out to everybody. To target telecom, you know, it's very difficult to talk to somebody who is non-technical, to find a passion. You know, some people love numbers and they love accounting, and if that's your thing, find that and go for it. But if your thing is telecom and you find an interest into learning how things work and the details, and you are not afraid to investigate protocols, you should join in and go that route. I do think that it's an advantage for anybody now. 10 years ago, it was a lot harder to find information. You didn't have search engines available the way you do now. So I think that this generation, anybody in today's day and age finding themselves in that scenario, can find information and draw those parallels that we're talking about translation a lot easier than it used to be. And the idea of being able to network, like we were talking earlier, much easier. For you to jump into a LinkedIn group and look at the transitions, you can easily find those groups and network. And you don't have to be a people person if you don't, need to, but you need to know how to sell yourself and find ways to parallel what your experience in the military is to what the translation in the military and the civilian world, and use that to your advantage.
Yeah, and I think the other translation piece is also going to be people make fun of the fact that we've got so many acronyms in the military. Telecommunications industry has a ton of acronyms too. But I do know that finding those pathways to having a successful career is something that can be, it doesn't have to be laid out initially. It can take time to be able to get to where you want to be. You don't always have to know what the 20-year plan is. You just have to get into that first step. And you don't have to have a degree to, as I was pointing earlier. More and more nowadays, again, as the former chairman of the workforce board, I know that in the future, it'll be less about VA and VS and more about CISSP and CCNE, and those are going to be the acronyms that people care about. It's about the certifications and the qualifications and the ways to be able to show that you've got the credentials to be able to fill some of these jobs. And there are so many more jobs than you might find on a company website. There are the ancillary jobs in the supplier chain that's associated with that industry. It's sort of like the automobile industry. It's not just Ford and GM, it's all of the other supply chain companies. So take a minute, if you would, to talk about some of those other ancillary jobs that might not be directly within some of the 3 or 4 major telecommunications companies that might be part of the telecommunications world of the universe.
Sure. Thank you. So I think when it comes to job fields and what you're looking for, I have been in situations where I'm interviewing people and I'm looking for skill sets. I'm looking for soft skills. Because likewise, we've been in positions where you hire somebody who has a degree and has this great resume, but then they can't get to work on time. And then you have all these other soft skills where you need them to fulfill a mission. You need them to be and fulfill requirements. A lot of stuff that I do is on government contracts, so many times I'll find myself like, okay, I have a system that's down. I need you to be reachable. When I call and I need you to come in, I need you to be responsible and be responsive and get there. So I think those are things that you can sell. But to get to your question as far as which fields to parallel, I would look at, like I said again, I always like to go back on use cases and see if you are into the, let's say you're in project management and you want to get into IT. Well, you don't have to necessarily be into IT. You can do project management for IT professionals. And the skill set that you're selling is the ability to lead, the ability to see tasks through, the ability to create a Gantt chart and follow it through and then present that to a government personnel to say, hey, we're on target. We're meeting requirements, we're meeting deadlines, or hey, we don't. We need to follow up on that, and being able to say, you know what, let me talk to my engineers, I'll follow up with you, and letting them know that this is how you need. So I would look for career fairs that work well together. Not every IT field has technical people managing it, so maybe the management is the part that you want to go into. And I think you would draw those parallels and think, again, use cases. how would you envision the use of everything around you? And you can draw from yourself, you know, and I'll tell you, for example, let's say you're a high school student and you're just getting in and you really don't know what any of these fields go into. Well, look at it from your school and draw parallels from that. You have your admin staff in your school, you have your cafeteria folks, you have all these things, then you have your teachers. How does that relate to the outside world? In other words, look at it from a support staff. Do you want to be in the support? Do you want to be in the leadership side where the principal and all those leadership comes in? Or do you want to be on the teacher side where you're the person running a specific area of subject? So, and then ask yourself where you want to be, and then draw in parallel from that, using those use cases from your own life and your own personalities and what your interests are truly in.
Yeah. So I think that there are three big nationwide carriers that we're familiar with: T-Mobile, AT&T, and then Verizon. And so there are over 300 smaller local exchange, what we call local exchange carriers, right? Like your local phone providers, like the offshoots of the Baby Bells. Those people build networks and they connect networks. And all of us buy stuff from Nokia, right? Network switches. And everybody buys fiber. And you know, I am an iPhone user, right? You get the iPhone from Apple. Who gets the chips from Qualcomm. And all of these companies kind of form a cohesive net of telecommunication services, right? There's Cisco servers out there, right? We use a lot of, I spend most of my day on WebEx calls, right? Like, which is, you know, just like the cooler version of Zoom, because they sell you like the integrated camera with the screen, right? And like, but all these pieces make up this network of telecommunications, and all of them provide opportunities, like directly doing the technology, but indirectly providing the support. And they're going to be in different places. And like where you are is frequently important, right? Like a decent part of why I work for T-Mobile is because I retired here in the National Capital Region, and I was looking for jobs in the National Capital Region. This was a job that was available. I applied for it, that I got, right? If like, you know, this job had been somewhere else, I would not be in this job because I didn't want to move again, right? That's the whole reason I got out. And so, a big part of it. When you're thinking about what are the like surrounding opportunities, you want to be open to the fact that, you know, you may not arrive at the name brand you thought you would. And maybe you will down the line, right? You mentioned Sprint a minute ago, right? Sprint doesn't exist anymore, right? Because it merged with T-Mobile, right? So you may end up at a smaller company, at a startup company, and then, you know, springboard from that into something else, right? You have to be open to what the opportunities are. You have to be conscious of what it is you want to do, both like the use case description of what is the field I want to enter into, and then where is that available to. Because if you want to build networks, like if you really have a passion for like figuring out how to provide service in certain areas, for example, right? If you come to a large nationwide network, like that problem has been solved, right? Like the 5G towers are up. But if you go to a small local exchange carrier in, you know, I mean, wherever you may be from, Missouri, right? And I'm just thinking about that because I was dealing with a carrier in Missouri earlier this week, right? There's still growth there. They're still building. They're still developing. They're interacting with the carriers around them. So the opportunities will be different, right? I have the opportunity to kind of work at a national level doing stuff, and I have a passion for that. But, you know, if you want to be able to get out there and like get in the company truck and drive to the next town over and work with somebody there, right? Then like that is the opportunity you're seeking. And like self-awareness there can be incredibly important. Because like, you know, like coming off Halloween yesterday, right? Everybody's out there decorating their yards and all that stuff. I hate yards. Like the suburbs were made for people like me. I'm well aware of that. I don't need grass. I'm not here for mowing grass, right? But like if you're somebody who wants to be on a ride lawnmower, you got to know that about yourself, right? And you have to be honest with yourself about that. Because it's going to drive you, again, like Freddie said, to your passion. It's going to drive you to what you want to do.
Excellent points all around. But as we all know, we got to be upfront. We got to be honest. There are pros and there are cons. So any industry. In my case, the pros were, I was mostly international telecom. I love the ability to interact with customers and companies throughout the Western Hemisphere and throughout Europe and so forth. I thought that was fascinating. I love the pace of technology advancements. You know, I started off in program management. I implemented the first STM1 between the United States and Mexico for the internet, right? So, and the advancements from then on to, you know, DWDM and everything else was just fascinating. But at the same time, had to deal with some of the regulatory hurdles, had to deal with some of the international cultural issues. You know, I had to work with France Telecom, and some of the bureaucracy there is just incredible. But there are pros and cons to every industry. Let's take a minute to talk about some of the pros and cons from your perspectives as well.
I would say the biggest pro and con in the telecom is that it's always changing, and I mean fast. You know, so what you think you know about any telecom will change a year later, and the skill sets that I would be looking for is going to change as well. You know, I feel that it is very dual-hatted, which is why aptitude really comes in. I think anybody in the military has to really sell themselves on aptitude and the ability to learn very quickly, because you do. Life is adjustment, and so is the telecom field. And you know, when somebody is telling me a long resume about how all this experience with PSTN is, and you know, all these different experiences on, you know, old systems, it's irrelevant. I want to know your digital experience. I want to know, okay, or how fast can you learn? So I would say that change is both a pro and a con, and your ability to keep up with the change is something you should sell, if that's what you're into. And if it's not, then there are other fields that don't have quite that same rate of change, and maybe that's your thing. So I think when we're talking about being honest with yourself, I think it's a good thing to look at that and see where that drive is. A funny story that kind of relates is, I have a 16-year-old as well that's going through it. He's trying to figure out what career to go into. And with that career, I'm telling him, okay, well, let's start backwards. Let's see, what do you want to do? And I'm like, okay, well, I want to dress good. Okay, well, that's going to require money. And he's like, okay, well, let's go back to that. What kind of things you want to buy? There's this big collection of things that they want to buy, which is expensive. You know, these are little figures, right? Well, one figure might cost $1,000. This is just decoration. You know, but it's what he's into. And okay, well, you like good shoes, you like decorative pieces to put in. In other words, you need to make a lot of money. So he's in an IT program in high school. I'm like, well, do you like IT? He's like, I enjoy it. It's more like, well, okay, well, if your focus is to make a lot of money and you're into IT, you feel like you have to aptitude for IT, you'll figure it out later. You know, and sometimes, all that to say that sometimes it's okay to figure it out later as well. But let something be your motivator. And if that motivator is making a decent amount of money and you feel like you have the aptitude to get into IT and something that doesn't become boring, you may not find your passion. And I say the same thing to somebody in the military. Sometimes if money's the driver, then go for it. Look at the different occupations. You may not want to be a teacher, but you may want to be an engineer. And if that's the case, you don't have the education for a career in engineering and getting a network engineer, well, look at and focus on a certificate that might lead to that, where there you can sell your soft skills and then have a certificate to back it up. Because a lot of times we're looking for people who are certified to meet government requirements, and that certification may just be a CompTIA certificate, a Security Plus, but there may be some flexibility in a bachelor's. So then you focus and kind of work backwards and reverse engineer your pathway.
So I think one of the pros is you have the opportunity to provide what, in many ways, is a public good, right? The ability to connect, the ability to reach out, the ability to talk to people, right? It's something we all kind of take for granted, but it is a massive public good that did not exist 50 years ago, 40 years ago, in the way it does now. Now the con of that is it's like, you know, I now work at T-Mobile. I took this job just over a year ago, right? When I did so, you get the opportunity to provide discounts to everybody in your family. They get on T-Mobile. When something doesn't work, they call you. I was like, man, I don't work at a care center. I'm a lawyer. Like, I don't know how this thing works, right? I don't know what's happening in there. So that's what's the downside. But on a broader sense, the con can be, right, like we just described, the technology is always changing, and you're in this very deeply connected web of technology. And so, right, there's government action that impacts that, right? Like when the rip and replace program happened, and we had to replace the Chinese developed components of telecom, right? That presents a business challenge. And like we can be honest about that, right? There's costs associated with that. And when you make the switch, and this is a hard thing for me to do, from government to business, right? At the end of the day, the business is trying to make money. And there are hard choices and decisions that are made inside the business, right? And so, you know, we don't sugarcoat this, but like, right, in the government, in the military specifically, right, you're generally not going to get fired, like unless you catastrophically do something wrong, right? You don't have to do anything wrong on the civilian side to get fired, right? It could just be a decision that is made. And 99.9% of the American economy lives that way, but coming out of the military, frequently, it can be jarring, right? And so you are at the mercy of forces that you will frequently not understand. And you have to put yourself in the best possible position to kind of ride those waves by continuously learning, by continuously being a change maker, and by continuously self-evolving. And sometimes that takes time, because you need to learn it. You're learning a new culture, you're learning a new workplace, and you're learning to make yourself an integral part, because you want the people there to look at you and be like, hey, we need to keep Freddie around because he knows what he's doing, right? So if the guys behind him get cut from the team, right, he's our starter. And so the way we think about it, right, is a little bit different. But I think where as veterans I think we can provide value there is frequently bring with us the ability to show up and start working, right? Because you're used to like going to a new place all the time, switching units, and whatever that place is, whatever that new unit is doing, they're doing. They're not waiting on you, right? You show up and you participate in the doing, right? And so that ability to hit the ground running, I think is even more important in the telecom industry because it is so fast moving. Because there is always something going on. And so you need to show up and immediately contribute, which I think goes well with what Freddie said, like, if you have a passion for it, if you have educated yourself for it, if you have prepared yourself for it, right, then you are the guy that like parachutes in and solves problems.
Excellent points, but I will say the other con about the industry is not so much the job piece of it, but just the nature of the beast is that not everyone has access like they should, right? It's not egalitarian in that regard. But the pro is that there are initiatives on the way to be able to make sure that more people have access to things like broadband and folks that maybe are underserved, maybe are in rural communities.
But even in that, right? Like there's I would actually say that as a pro because there's growth, right? Like the broadband access programs like that, like they're not going to happen on their own. Somebody's going to go out there and build those systems, right? And those people are going to be hired and they're going to then perform that work, right? Like the BEAD funding that's out there now from Congress. We talk a lot about inside T-Mobile about access to native reservations, which are one of the most underserved areas from like a broadband, from a telecom perspective. And I talked earlier a little bit about, like that's why I was talking to someone in Missouri, about like being in rural places. I am a city person. I'm all about that urban life. I need sprawl. But there's lots of people, right? And being in the Marine Corps, I've worked with a lot of them and I love them. People that want to be out there, like out there, right? But then again, so if that's you, right, there are going to be opportunities there. There's going to be opportunities, like we tend to think of like tech as being like in the city, like New York and Palo Alto and right, like that's where the tech is. Even here in DC, right? But as we move this technology out to gain greater access, all these tech jobs, not all of them, but a fraction of the technology jobs will migrate out, right? You can only build with so many data centers like out where I work in Herndon, right? They're going to have to move. And for redundancy purposes, they have to move to other places, right? And so like these jobs and the opportunities they bring with them are all going to migrate and they will be available in a much broader swath of the country.
Yeah. And it's a great example of a public-private nonprofit partnership where you've got funding that's coming from the government that's being deployed through some of the private sector telecom companies and nonprofits that are able to help inform the public about these opportunities to be able to gain better access to broadband and telecommunications. And I know NTIA is here with us this afternoon. That's an integral part of that effort. But before we move on to our last question, and then we'll open up for questions, but we all know that the hardest question to answer sometimes is how, right? Those who think they know what they're talking about talk, vision and strategy. Those who actually know what they're talking about talk logistics, right? How do people start getting into finding where the jobs are? Where do they go? What are the websites? So how do you actually get into the industry?
Yeah. So Freddie already mentioned LinkedIn groups, which I think is a undervalued resource because what you're looking for is I think the most powerful tool is to make inside connections right, that didn't allow you to leverage whatever internal processes are inside whatever organization you want to be a part of, right? And like every company now, like for T-Mobile, if you Google T-Mobile military, right, our military recruiting site will pop up. Lacey Craig is our military recruiter. She'll get in touch with you, and she's great. But I think what you're kind of getting at is, what do you need to have before you get to that step, right? And I think we've already touched on the education component, right? ALVA is obviously a powerful component with the job matching that ALVA does, and various other affinity groups that are out there, right? But what you need to really think about is who do I want to be when I present myself to this organization, right? From an education perspective, from an attitude perspective, right? From a preparation for the interview perspective, right? And leveraging all the various tools that are available, right? Like when I made the transition, lots of people were tremendously helpful to me and offering me kind of what they call informational interviews. And I went a couple months, because I can be hard-headed sometimes, not thinking about that. And then as I got offered my first job interview, in my mind I was like, I should really do a rehearsal for this. And like all the wheels clicked into place. And I was like, oh crap, I gotta call this guy back. Let's do an informational interview, right? But like those types of steps and leveraging the networks that ALVA, that LinkedIn, all these other organizations provide to put yourself in the best possible position. Because now that I'm on the other side of this, and I do interviews for T-Mobile as part of our diversity hiring initiatives, right? It is obvious the people that are prepared for interviews and the people that are not. And I look back at myself, right? Like the last interview I did was with T-Mobile. So they offered me a job and I got the job. That was obviously my best interview. Because at that point I had done a couple, I had some reps, and I'd taken some swings at the ball and struck out, right? But like you want to shorten the time of striking out, right? You want to get on base and hit a home run. And to do that, you have to be as prepared as possible, right? In the military sense, you have to arrive on the objective with everything you need to complete the mission of convincing this organization to bring you on board, because you're going to hit the ground running and solve problems, right? And you have to put yourself in a position where you believe it, because it's true. But you have to have them believe it. And the way you do that is through preparation, both internally, laying the groundwork in that company, and externally on yourself.
I would say that nothing has changed. I mean, I think that when it comes to getting onto the workforce, all the same methods that were tried and true for multiple generations are still there. I think that for somebody looking at it, they should look at internship programs. There's plenty of internship programs. Every company out there has veteran, pathway programs. So I think it's very good and easy. What has changed is the reachability. I think back in the day, you would have looked in your town and you would work in relationships with people you knew. Now you can get through with social media networks that are out there. Now you have reachability at your fingertips where you can sell yourself, you can find out about these programs. So that's the biggest difference now. It's just that you're now part of a much bigger pool that other generations before us have not been. So I think you need to look at avenues like that. Internships are still there. That hasn't gone away. Maybe you don't need to, reach out to people in a physical way, but there's virtual now platforms where you can reach out to the groups on social media, and you have those still there. But the old school methods have not gone away either. You still can reach out to your neighbor. You still can reach out to the person to, it may not be, it could be a relative, it could be group in forums like this. So I don't think any of that is lost, but I think that the biggest sell that you have is yourself. You look at your not only your aptitude, but your soft skills, and then recognize those as values to be able to sell discipline, be able to sell your ability to learn and keep up with changes. So I would say that none of that has gone away. I think the biggest difference when it comes to military, when they're looking at it, is trying to draw out what that military resume looks like. I've had plenty of times where I look at a candidate and I have to read through 10 pages of resume, and I'm like, oh, this is great. Have all the stuff that I expected. And then I'm already looking, okay, well, let me shrink this down to 3 pages of what I really need. And even that is a lot. And once we hire them, it's like, hey, we're going to have to really work on this resume because we want to sell different aspects, and we finally get it down to 1 or 2 pages. But, the point is, you want to look at what that looks like and have different methods of resume. I think when somebody's looking at those methods and they're looking at it, they can't shy away from the fact that you may have 10 different resumes, one for every job, and you're gonna get out of it what you put in. You know, if you're looking and applying for jobs and you're using that same one resume and you're looking at keywords, you have to think in the world of how resumes are looked at today. And it may not be an actual person looking at it, it may be a software that's scanning through keywords and then presenting your resume out of the thousands of resumes that were submitted to get you into the hundreds that a recruiter's actually gonna look at. So knowing that, you have to keep that in mind and cater your resume for the software, not for the person, you know, and kind of change your thought process on how you're submitting it. But all that ties into what you're saying as far as that transition and finding those parallels, and which ultimately gets down to what we're talking about with this topic now, which is, you know, how do you use and these different methods. All that to say that it's all still there, same methods, just your approach may be a little different.
Sure. So to add on to that, I think that when you are on the inside, when you're still in the uniform, and you're looking out into the wide, wide world, and you're thinking about kind of what are the next steps, I think you have to be conscious again of yourself, and you have to be conscious, I think, a little bit of the culture. So you mentioned you came out of the Air Force and went into Raytheon, and I think there are these things that tend to surround where we are. That's not a bad thing. That make it an easier transition. Right? So like one of the job offers I had before I took this job was with Boeing, right? And if you walk out of the Pentagon and you don't get hit walking across 395, and you walk into Boeing, right? Like the world doesn't change that much, right? It looks very similar. The wall furnitures are a little bit nicer. All the people there kind of have the same haircut as you because they're all used to work in the same place that you used to work at, right? But sometimes we're looking for a clean break and we're looking to do something different, right? And like thinking about that culture, because you're thinking about what that's going to be like, right? Like one of the things I really appreciate about my current job is I can wear a t-shirt. Like I walk into my office looking like this, and I walk in here, and I talk, and it's great. But like you are thinking about in a tactical sense, right? And then like in winning the immediate fight, what is it that I want? And how do those people think? Because culture represents how an organization thinks about change, how it thinks about bringing people in. And you know, in an interview, it represents when they're looking at you, do I want to look at that person every day for 8 hours? And do I think while I'm looking at them, they're going to do the things I want, and even when I'm not watching them, they're going to continue to do them, right? And how the culture of an organization will influence that. And the culture your organization projects will influence. Like, you know, I'm a Marine, right? You kind of like wear that on your shoulder. But when I say to people, I'm a United States Marine. When you say to somebody, I'm a soldier, right? At some point, you'll be able to say to people, I'm a guardian, and they'll know what that means, right? Like, that projects an image. In their mind, you have now created something. And you need to put yourself into a place of leveraging that, right? Because you've now cracked the door open a little bit. And now in that, you want to stream in there, right? And here's what that means to you, and here's the value that it adds to you, right? And like, speaking of the resume, right? Because when we're thinking about tailoring the resume, it's going to say on there that you're in the military, right? But even that, like that tiny little blurb, right? You still have to use that to then indicate that here's why that's important to you, right? Like, it can sometimes, when you're coming out, right? Especially in the DC area, where you at all times are seeing former service members who've been tremendously successful, because they're everywhere around you. Like you're going to trip over very successful veterans, right? But you're also going to see homeless veterans. Like we don't need to sugarcoat this. And the separating factors here, not to, you know, we don't need to get into like the depth of homelessness and all that, but like the separating factors are, you're not going to walk out of the door and somebody's going to hand you a job, right? That's not how it works. But you can crack the door open and then use that opportunity to funnel all the stuff you have, all the things that have been poured into you through your service, to generate the next opportunity.
You're here. I think we have time to open it up for just one or two questions and maybe some comments. Anybody have a question or comment? Ricardo?
Excellent, gentlemen. Very appreciate it a whole lot. So you're talking to an audience here where most of us, I want to say, have successful transitions, right? But with that, what is our role now that we're in these positions to make it that much easier for everybody coming out. You know, and I don't work for a company where most of us are veterans. I have a small DC office, but everybody else is in Jersey, it's everywhere else, where there isn't a lot of veterans. I'm not going to, you know, trip over one unsuccessful veteran. So it's incumbent upon us to make it easier for the next generation. What is the role that we play, and what are some of the things that you suggest that we do?
So I think what you're doing right now is like the start, right? You have to model being a successful veteran, right? You have to, and like, you know, that's gonna be a little bit uncomfortable because you got to a little bit wear being the veteran on your sleeve, right? Like it's not, like people can't look at you and tell, right? Like, so I think there does have to be a little bit of broadcasting so that if a transitioning service member or another veteran sees you, they know like, oh, he made it, right? Because then that offers them like a light, because then like it's on them to take the next step to connect with you and say, oh, here's a successful veteran, let me talk to him, let me learn from him. And I think we have to be open then to the mentorship and the teaching world, right? And sometimes that can, you know, it can be a little bit challenging because you're doing a little bit of crushing of dreams because you're telling people like it's not going to be easy. But it's the old tale of like you're walking down the street and you fall in a hole and like a doctor walks by and says, oh, it looks like you broke your leg, come see me tomorrow, I'll give you some Motrin. And then like the pastor walks by and is like, oh man, you fell in a hole, I'll pray for you. And then your best friend walks by and he jumps in the hole with you and you're like, what are you doing? Now we're both in the hole. And he's like, but I know the way out, right? That's what we're doing. We have to show them the way out, right? Not like out in a bad way, but like you can get through it, but you have to do the work to get through it. And I think then like internally to the companies that we work at, you know, large companies tend to have affinity groups, like T-Mobile has a very strong veterans affinity group. But even there, right, being involved, being engaged, right, and right, like the reason I got onto, you know, the hiring committee was I end up here, right, is being a voice in those rooms and being a voice in those processes where if somebody maybe didn't do everything they could have, and now there's a resume making its way around and people are saying like, well, we're not going to consider this person because I don't understand what any of this says, right? Putting yourself at the point of friction to be like, hold on, let me help you out here. Like I can solve this problem, right? I think this is actually a good candidate and then being there, right? Because like, and from an entirely selfish perspective, right? If the company is going to miss out on the talents of this individual because that individual is not great at writing resumes, right? Like, that's not helpful to the organization. I'm not doing this because I want to, you know, I do want to help veterans. But like, I want to help the veteran that what I'm seeing is, like, oh, no, this person is who we need. He just didn't know how to tell you that he's the one that you need, right? So I think it's putting yourself in that place.
But I feel like you have to have empathy. You know, it really is an effort that you have to make. And sometimes it's a thankless job. I think that when you are in a position where you can make a difference in somebody else's life, you should jump on it without any expectations other than helping somebody else. I think especially in the Latin community, sometimes, you know, it took me years before, you know, I started speaking Spanish in a public workplace. I didn't want them to think differently of me. You know, I didn't want them to think less than. So I think with us as Latin leaders or being in a position where you can have a difference, whether it's a hiring position or even networking, we should jump on it. I think especially as Latin veterans, you have a duty, I think, to look out for each other and look at the world of diversity and inclusion and you know, and challenge yourself because it may require effort, it may require work, and it may require relationships that you don't even realize you're building. And sometimes we need help as a whole. You know, if you are a small business owner and you're talking to somebody that's with a bigger company, it may not be nothing related to their company, but they may know a neighbor who does, and they may have a need that you have the skill sets to fulfill. So I really feel that it takes effort, and I think that you have to do a due diligence to be in a position because somebody helped you along the way. And we are stronger together as a whole, and we have a bigger impact as a whole. So I think that we owe it to each other to seek opportunities to present to other people. And sometimes they need some guidance to be able to take advantage of the opportunities when they present them. And you know, I would say to that is that it may not be easy, and it would require effort and work. And if you're up for the challenge of making a difference to somebody else and looking at it with a sense of empathy and with a sense of being able to look towards something that is part of the greater good, and diversity being one of them. And why not? You know, I think eventually things work their way around you, and you will be thanked in a different way. And sometimes it's a small world. You know, we may see each other in a different conference or a different meeting and in a different environment and find other ways to help each other. So I think ultimately it's about helping each other.
So
Great
I want
points.
to jump in right after Freddie. So I'm Celeste, and I'm also with AT&T. One of the things that I want to make sure, because I know this is going to be recorded, is our website, and that's att.jobs for anyone that is working, looking for a job. But for veterans, I want to highlight att.jobs/diversity-veterans is the specific website that targets the job openings in particular for veterans. And I took the liberty and I went on the website just now. And there are, of course, like you mentioned, Thomas, you know, there's going to be government contract specific jobs that are what I would consider easy transition jobs. So they would be looking for they would be looking for veterans that have those skill sets. And so when you look at it, you have to leverage your clearance levels to be an asset in the transitioning into the corporate world. So you may not be looking at it as an asset, but I couldn't get those jobs because it would take me forever to get those clearance levels that are already existing within the jobs that you currently have. So, you know, that is, again, an asset, not a hindrance. So look for those big companies that may have government contracts that require the clearance levels that you may currently be possessing. And we tend to write our job description in a language that is translatable from currently, you know, jobs that are currently being filled on the government side and now on the private sector. So, you know, like I found one that is like asset manager, and when you go and you read the description, it will be very much a government description job. So you don't have to worry that much about translating your current job responsibilities to AT&T's. But then I found job opportunities that, like for example, an automotive equipment technician, right? And to your point earlier on about high school only diplomas, and I was like, well, I wonder if we are requiring more than just a high school diploma, and we don't. We just, you know, we are requiring you to have a high school diploma with experience in order to earn about $60,000 for an automotive, you know, somebody that's a mechanic, basically. And then I have another one that is like a ticket coordinator, but because they are working under a government contract, they need to have certain clearances. And again, that person could be making up to $70,000 a year working at a call center distributing tickets, electronic tickets. And so I wanted to make sure that we currently offer jobs that didn't require leadership positions, so somebody that would have a BS or a master's degree and higher. So I thoroughly encourage anybody that's about to be transitioning to take a look at this website. And of course, as you were mentioning, Thomas, about making those connections on LinkedIn, doing informational interviews, we also encourage that as well, because that allows you to get a sense of the culture of the company and if it would be a good match for you as to what you envision in transitioning out. So I appreciate the additional time. I'm sorry if I was taking time away from you. But I wanted to make sure that, especially as we are recording this, that people feel they have a place to land. And again, we're all, as employees, we are all responsible in ensuring that, prospective employees have an opportunity. So we should all be responding to pings from LinkedIn when anybody reaches out and says, hey, what is it like to work at AT&T? What is it like to work at Wells Fargo, JP Morgan Chase, or whomever? It's all, we all carry that burden to make sure that a person that is transitioning and wants to be a prospective employee feels comfortable in pinging and saying, hey, what is it like to work there? So,
I think the one word that comes to mind both, to your point as well as to Ricardo's question is the word intentionality. You've got to be willing to step forward and say, no, we want to make a difference. It's not enough to just say, the doormat is there, the welcome mat is there. Sometimes you have to reach out and engage and not be afraid to break dishes and ruffle feathers, but be the pebble in the shoe. And so, no, we need to fill this job as much as possible with veterans or with Latinos, with minorities or underserved communities, but that takes intentionality. So, yeah.
I'd like to, if I can add to that, so thank you for mentioning that. AT&T is also part of a larger network called HiringOurHeroes.org, and that one is great. It's a great resource that multiple companies look at. So for the sake of documenting and making sure that people are aware that is a great resource.
And I think we're out of time, but I want to make sure I leave an opportunity for Monica Delani from NTIA to make a comment during this telecom panel.
Yes. Thank you so much. I would be remiss if I did not mention that the bipartisan infrastructure bill, we're coming up on the 2-year anniversary of the bipartisan infrastructure bill that has provided a historic investment in providing internet services to everybody. It's Internet for All is our program, internetforall.gov. But I would also tell you that when we're talking about jobs in telecom, we already know that this historic investment, it is the rural electrification program of our generation. It is going to be all across the country, and we already know that we are going to have a shortage of jobs. A shortage of employees. There are going to be a ton of new tech jobs out there, whether it's cutting the fiber and splicing it, whether it's digging and trenching, whether it's providing security. Why shouldn't Latino veterans or people that look like us in this room build it, use it, and protect it? These are the jobs. We don't always have a roadmap about what jobs are coming up in the future. This is that roadmap. The Biden administration is providing these funds, $62 billion, okay? And that money should be going to people that look like us to build it, use it, and protect it. Additionally, I would say that it is incumbent upon us to do not leave this room. If you're interested in how you can make a difference in your community, don't leave this room without meeting everybody in this room and getting a card from everybody in this room and building that network. And because it matters that we have Freddie Jimenez at AT&T, it matters because now you can call Freddie and say, hey, I've got this person that I think is going to be a good fit for XYZ job they applied for. It's always about building your network and how you get there. You get there with the help of others, and you can be that village for other people. But I would just say we have a roadmap to the jobs of the future. They're here. They're not in the future, they're here. So prepare yourselves. Prepare the next generation. These are important, this is a really important time in our country, and this investment, this economic engine is real, and we have to be ready to take advantage of it. Because the economy that springs up, look at what cell phones did for the economy, right? We're talking about the businesses, the tangential businesses that grew out of that. Cell phone cases, cell phone glass protectors, plugs, cords, everything that you can imagine, cybersecurity. You can get a cybersecurity degree in 1 year. Before I close, I wanted to ask a question of both of these companies, T-Mobile and AT&T. One of the challenges for our community is the pathways are not open to them. They're not always open to them through the educational system. Do your companies provide apprenticeship programs. I know you mentioned internship programs, but apprenticeship programs are really essential, I think, for when you have a non-traditional pathway. I think it's really important to have those kinds of opportunities, and I wanted to ask if you guys had actual apprenticeship programs.
So there are. I mean, as soon as you Google AT&T apprenticeship, that will show up. And but I think that sometimes it's difficult to say that opportunities are not there, or the pathways are not there. I think we have to encourage people to look and see what's actually out there, because there are opportunities out there if you look. You know, if you are someone who is just sitting there and waiting for opportunities to come up, it may appear as if those opportunities are never there, not realizing there's apprenticeship programs, not realizing there's pathway programs out there, not realizing that the opportunities that you think are not there are actually there. So all that to say that I would encourage people to take the time and effort to look for those programs and apply. You know, it's hard to complain about not having jobs available if you didn't submit for those jobs in the first place, or didn't get your resume set up and established. So, you know, they are good.
I know we're up on time, so to answer your immediate question, yes, T-Mobile offers apprenticeships, and that there's a range of things that build on it, right? Freddie mentioned Hiring Our Heroes, right? So the Skill Bridge program through the Department of Defense, and all these various means and avenues of accessing both education and the opportunity to compete and demonstrate value and willingness to do these jobs in non-traditional ways. And I think you're right. You have to. There's a little bit of putting yourself out there, but specifically to veterans, I think those of us that have made the successful transition, there's also the element of like pulling up those behind us.
Mara, what's the website again?
Internetforall.gov.
Internetforall.gov. I want to bring up our next panel, but I want to please join me in thanking our panelists very much. And then stick around after that panel. Speak to McKesson and Wells Fargo and AT&T and T-Mobile. The folks that are here, we're going to have that job matchmaking at the end, so take advantage of it by all means. Thank you again.
Thank you.